you rebuild yourself in silence, not through loud announcements, not through begging for validation, but through cold, private transformation. The world doesn't need to know what you're becoming, only that one day you will move differently, stronger, sharper, untouchable. This is the path of the man who stops reacting and starts calculating, the man who stops explaining and starts observing, the man who no longer seeks power because he becomes it. Listen closely, because this is where your reinvention begins, where the old version of you dies quietly and the new version rises without mercy. You will learn to speak less so your thoughts sharpen, to detach so your emotions no longer betray you, to move with purpose so every action becomes a strategy. This is Machiavelli's path to power, rebirth through discipline, silence, and control. If you're ready to become a strong, quiet, calculated force, comment, "I rise in silence." This is Machiavellian mode. Your evolution starts now. Number 1. The death of the old you. The first step in rebuilding yourself into a strong, quiet, calculated force is accepting that the old version of you must die, not slowly, not gently, but with a cold and deliberate decision that he no longer has the right to exist. The man who overreacted, who sought approval, who explained himself to people who never respected him, who allowed emotions to steer him, he cannot walk with you into the future you are creating. You must bury him without ceremony. This death is internal, silent, and strategic. You strip away his weaknesses the same way a warrior discards broken armor, unemotionally, logically, ruthlessly. The world does not need to know. In fact, let them believe nothing has changed. Let them underestimate you while you rebuild your foundations in secrecy. This is where transformation begins, not in noise, but in quiet, private shifts that harden your mentality and sharpen your perception. You start thinking differently, responding differently, valuing yourself differently. Your silence becomes intentional, your boundaries become non-negotiable, your energy becomes protected. The old you was predictable, the new you is unreadable. The old you was reactive, the new you is strategic. If you're ready to bury who you once were and rise as someone they can no longer anticipate or break, comment, "The old me is gone." Number 2. Silence as your new strategy. When you choose to rebuild yourself into a strong, quiet, calculated force, your silence becomes more than a habit. It becomes a weapon, a shield, and a declaration of inner supremacy. Most people speak to feel relevant, to feel seen, to feel powerful, but the man who is becoming dangerous does the opposite. He withdraws his words, he limits his reactions, and he lets silence create an atmosphere others cannot read. This is where your rise begins. Your silence forces the world to guess what you're thinking, what you're planning, and what you're capable of, and that uncertainty becomes your strategic advantage. When you stop talking, you start noticing patterns others miss. You see who lies, who manipulates, who drains you, who fears you, and who underestimates you. You learn how people expose themselves through their own noise. You learn how emotions settle into clarity when you don't immediately respond. You learn how your energy stops leaking when you refuse to explain your every move. Silence breaks your old impulsiveness and replaces it with calculation. It disconnects you from chaos and plugs you into power. People will feel the shift even if they don't understand it. They will sense that you are no longer predictable, no longer easily provoked, no longer accessible on the level you once were. And that is exactly the point. Silence turns you from someone reactive into someone unreadable. And in a world built on fear, ego, and insecurity, being unreadable is a form of dominance. So speak less, observe more, withdraw from pointless debates. Let your silence become the boundary that separates the old version of you from the new one. If you're ready to use silence as your strategy, comment, "My silence builds power." Number 3, rebuilding your mind into a weapon. To become a strong, quiet, calculated force, You must rebuild your mind into something sharper, harder, and more disciplined than anything you've carried before. This reconstruction isn't poetic, it's surgical. You begin by stripping away every weak mental habit that once controlled you. Overthinking, people-pleasing, emotional impulsiveness, the need to respond instantly, the urge to justify yourself, the fear of disappointing others. These are mental parasites feeding on your potential. Remove them ruthlessly. Then replace them with something colder and more deliberate. Patience, restraint, long-term logic, emotional detachment, strategic thinking. A powerful mind is not loud. It moves slowly, methodically, like a hunter that never wastes energy on noise. You stop asking, "How do I look to others?" and start asking, "How does this decision strengthen me?" You stop reacting to every spark and instead watch, calculate, wait for the right moment to strike. You begin to understand that not every battle deserves your presence, not every insult deserves your energy, and not every opportunity is meant to be chased. A rebuilt mind becomes selective about people, about goals, about emotions, about conversations. You think less about defending your reputation and more about building your internal power. And slowly, the things that once overwhelmed you now feel small, almost irrelevant, because you've created a mental fortress nothing external can penetrate without your permission. People will try to provoke you, but they'll fail. They'll try to confuse you, but your clarity will cut through their noise. They'll try to guilt trip you, but your emotional detachment will make their manipulation bounce off steel. This is how a man becomes dangerous, not through aggression, but through unshakable mental control. When your mind becomes a weapon, your life becomes unbreakable. Comment, "My mind is sharpening," if you're ready to rebuild your inner world into something cold, strategic, and unstoppable. Number 4, learning to move like a calculated force. To rebuild yourself into a strong, quiet, calculated force, you must transform the way you move through the world. Your actions, your responses, your pace, your presence. Most men drift, react, stumble, and hope life aligns for them, but you are no longer permitted to live in that passive state. From this moment on, every movement becomes intentional, every choice carries weight, and every decision is rooted in strategy rather than emotion. You begin by slowing down your impulses. You no longer rush to speak, rush to react, or rush to choose. You let situations unfold while you study angles others are too emotional to see. You learn to wait, not out of fear, but out of calculation. You understand that timing is a weapon, and the man who acts last often acts with the greatest power. You move with purpose. No wasted steps, no unnecessary battles, no involvement in chaos that offers no reward. You start conserving your energy, redirecting it toward long-term gains rather than short-term gratification. You stop trying to win every argument and instead aim to win outcomes. You stop trying to impress people and instead aim to influence reality. You learn that a quiet man with a focused mission is far more intimidating than a loud man with no direction. Your walk changes, steady, controlled, grounded. Your eyes change, calm, aware, unreadable. Your posture changes, no more shrinking, no more bending, no more leaking weakness. People notice, even if they can't explain it. They sense something colder in you, something disciplined, something evaluating them rather than seeking their approval. And the more you master this calculated way of moving, the more you detach from the emotional noise that once dictated your choices. You begin to make decisions based on logic, advantage, and alignment with your future self. Not out of anger, not out of fear, not out of pride, but out of purpose. And when you do act, when you speak, when you move, when you execute, it hits harder because it is rare, deliberate, and precise. This is how dangerous men operate. They don't waste motion, they don't waste attention, they don't waste themselves. They act with sharp intention and let the results speak for them. If you're ready to move through life like a calculated force, grounded in silence and driven by strategy, comment, "Every move has purpose." Number 5, detaching from emotional noise and reclaiming control. Rebuilding yourself into a strong, quiet, calculated force requires a level of emotional detachment most people will never achieve because they're addicted to reacting, addicted to validation, addicted to the chaos that keeps them weak, predictable, and easy to manipulate. But not you, not anymore. Detachment is not about being cold for show. It is about reclaiming complete sovereignty over your inner world, so no external force can hijack your thoughts, dictate your mood, or steer your decisions. You begin by recognizing how often your emotions were weaponized against you. Guilt used to make you comply, anger used to make you slip, sadness used to drain your focus, envy used to distort your goals, impatience used to make you choose poorly. All of these were openings, doors through which manipulation flowed. Closing those doors is your next evolution. You learn to watch your emotions instead of obeying them. You learn to pause before reacting, creating that few seconds of silence where impulsive versions of you once lived. You learn to tell yourself, not every emotion deserves action. Detachment is not suppression, it is mastery. It is the ability to feel without being owned by the feeling. When someone disrespects you, you don't explode, you observe. When someone lies, you don't argue, you file it away. When someone withdraws love to control you, you don't chase, you detach deeper. The world becomes clear when emotions lose their power to distort it. You start seeing people not for who you wish they were, but for who they truly are. You analyze patterns, motives, weaknesses, inconsistencies, and intentions with a level of precision that emotional people cannot even understand. This is where your personal power multiplies, because the less emotional noise inside you, the sharper your thinking, the stronger your boundaries, the cleaner your decisions. You stop seeking attention because you no longer need external confirmation to feel real. You stop fearing loss because your value no longer depends on anyone staying. You stop explaining yourself because your silence is now a declaration of confidence. And slowly, you become someone others cannot predict, cannot guilt, cannot control. They may try, but nothing sticks, nothing penetrates, nothing shakes you. Your calm becomes unnerving to those who rely on emotional chaos to dominate others. Your neutrality becomes dangerous. The man who cannot be emotionally manipulated is the man who is feared, respected, and left alone to build his empire. You move forward without noise, without drama, without attachments that drain your power. You become fully aligned with your mission, guided only by logic, purpose, and internal command. When your emotions no longer run your life, your future becomes yours to design, not something shaped by the hands of others. If you're ready to detach from emotional noise and reclaim total control over your inner kingdom, comment, "My emotions serve me, not rule me." Number 6. Forging unbreakable discipline and self-control. Discipline is the empire you build inside yourself before the world ever sees a single result. And if you are truly rebuilding yourself into a strong, quiet, calculated force, then you must develop a level of discipline and self-control so firm, so relentless, so internally dominant that nothing external, not pressure, not temptation, not emotion, not circumstance, can break the structure you are constructing within. Understand this clearly. Most men never rise, not because life is unfair, but because they are unreliable. They negotiate with their goals, delay their growth, and betray themselves daily through comfort, excuses, and the illusion that they have more time. But you are stepping into a new identity, a new architecture of the mind where excuses do not exist, where weakness is starved, and where the only voice you obey is the one that commands you to rise. Discipline begins with ownership, brutal, unfiltered ownership of your habits, your failures, your environment, and your behavior. No more blaming circumstances, no more waiting for motivation, no more hoping for the perfect moment. You create the moment by acting, even when everything in you resists. A disciplined man follows his plan even when he is exhausted, uninspired, irritated, or overwhelmed, because discipline is not about feeling good. It is about doing what strengthens you consistently until consistency becomes identity. You begin restructuring your days with intention. You wake up not to check your phone, but to dominate your morning. You train not to look good, but to forge resilience and sharpen your will. You work not only when you feel like it, but because your future depends on it. You stop filling your mind with useless information that weakens your focus, and you stop allowing people who lack ambition to influence your decisions. You build routines that harden your capacity to endure discomfort, because comfort is the enemy of greatness, and repetition is the father of mastery. But discipline alone is not enough. Self-control is the second half of your evolution, and it is even more difficult because it requires you to confront the chaos inside yourself. Self-control means you no longer react like a slave to impulses. You no longer chase instant pleasure. You no longer allow anger, jealousy, fear, or excitement to dictate your choices. You learn the art of the pause, the silent space between stimulus and response where power is built. When something irritates you, you pause. When someone provokes you, you observe. When temptation appears, you evaluate. When emotion rises, you detach. A man who cannot control himself is a man who can be controlled by anyone. But a man who controls himself becomes dangerous because nothing external can pull him away from his mission. You begin mastering your impulses one by one. You teach yourself to delay gratification because every powerful man in history understood that the ability to wait strategically is superior to the desire to indulge immediately. You learn to hold your tongue because silence often wins more battles than arguments ever could. You learn to control your facial expressions so no one can read your emotions or calculate your weaknesses. You learn to protect your time by refusing to be available to everyone. You develop the patience of a strategist who thinks 10 steps ahead, not the impatience of a reactionary who collapses at the first sign of difficulty. And as your self-control strengthens, an interesting shift begins. The world around you loses its ability to disturb you. People's opinions mean nothing. Disrespect doesn't rattle you, it reveals them. Manipulation no longer works because you see patterns before they fully unfold. Temptations lose their power because you are building something far more important than momentary pleasure. Your mind becomes calm, precise, calculated. Your emotions stop running on reflex and begin operating under command. Your decisions become sharper because they are guided by logic instead of impulse. You become someone whose energy cannot be hijacked, whose attention cannot be stolen, whose focus cannot be broken. This is power. Real, internal, unshakable power. But discipline and self-control also reshape your identity in ways people will feel, even if they don't understand. You speak less, you listen more, you choose silence where the old you would have exploded. You walk away from nonsense because nonsense has no strategic value. Your posture changes, your presence hardens, your patience deepens. People begin to sense something different in you, not arrogance, not coldness, but controlled intensity. They notice that your energy is no longer scattered. Your purpose is no longer diluted. Your habits are no longer inconsistent. They feel your restraint, and restraint is intimidating because it is rare. They cannot manipulate a man who does not react. They cannot distract a man who is focused. They cannot weaken a man who disciplines himself daily. And deep down, they envy the strength they see but cannot access. With discipline and self-control, your entire life begins to align. Your work becomes sharper, your relationships become cleaner, your boundaries become stronger, your priorities become obvious. You stop tolerating environments that drown your ambition. You stop entertaining people whose presence drains your mental space. You stop wasting time on activities that produce nothing. And you redirect that saved time and energy toward building the man you were always meant to become. The more disciplined you become, the freer you become, free from addiction, free from chaos, free from emotional instability, free from external control. The more self-controlled you become, the more powerful you become. Powerful in silence, powerful in decision, powerful in presence. Discipline is the engine, self-control is the steering. Together, they turn you into a man who no longer moves randomly, but purposefully. no longer reacts impulsively but strategically, no longer sabotages himself but shapes himself into something formidable. This is how unstoppable men are created, not through noise, not through force, but through internal mastery, repeated every day until mastery becomes identity. If you are ready to step into this elite version of yourself, comment, "I command myself completely." Number 7. Cultivating strategic isolation and elite focus. Strategic isolation is not loneliness, not withdrawal, not emotional hiding. It is the deliberate sharpening of the mind, the purification of your environment, and the reclamation of your inner power from every voice, distraction, and attachment that once dictated your direction. If you are truly rebuilding yourself into a strong, quiet, calculated force, then isolation becomes your crucible, the silent forge where your future identity is crafted with precision. Most men run from solitude because it exposes their weaknesses. It forces them to confront the truth about their habits, their insecurities, their undisciplined patterns, and the emptiness they've been filling with noise, people, and temporary pleasures. But the man walking the Machiavellian path understands that only in isolation does clarity appear, only in silence does strategy form, and only in solitude does greatness take shape. Strategic isolation means you choose distance with purpose. You remove yourself from environments that pull you backward, from people who drain more than they contribute, from conversations that weaken your mind, from routines that dilute your ambition. You disconnect from everything that blurs your vision, so your focus becomes razor sharp. And this is where elite focus is born. Focus is not simply attention. Focus is the ability to lock your mind onto one mission, one path, one identity, without being pulled by the gravity of distractions that keep average men trapped in cycles of stagnation. When you isolate yourself intentionally, your thoughts stop being scattered across dozens of trivial concerns. Instead, they begin to align like soldiers standing at attention, awaiting orders. You see your goals with greater precision. You understand your weaknesses with ruthless honesty. You recognize which habits must die for your future to live. Isolation reveals everything, the truth about who you are and the truth about who you must become. And while this truth may be uncomfortable, it is also liberating because for the first time you realize you are fully in control of your evolution. Elite focus demands sacrifice. The sacrifice of comfort, noise, shallow entertainment, pointless socializing, and relationships built on emotional dependence rather than mutual growth. You begin choosing depth over distraction, solitude over chaos, silence over noise. You start cutting away the unnecessary because unnecessary is the enemy of excellence. The man who cannot be alone with his thoughts will never control them. The man who needs constant stimulation will never produce anything meaningful. The man who needs social validation will never build inner authority. Strategic isolation strengthens your mind in ways society cannot understand. When you stop giving your attention away freely, your awareness becomes heightened. You begin noticing patterns you never saw before, people's motives, emotional hooks, manipulative tactics, hidden agendas, subconscious behaviors. You develop a psychological distance that allows you to see the world without the fog of emotion. You begin thinking like a strategist rather than a participant. You detach from the meaningless and invest your energy only where it multiplies. As your focus intensifies, your standards rise. You no longer tolerate half-effort, half-truths, or half-relationships. You stop explaining your decisions to people who haven't earned access to your internal world. You stop justifying your boundaries to those who benefited from your lack of them. You stop participating in environments where your presence is undervalued or misused. People will accuse you of changing, and they will be right. They will say you've become distant, cold, unavailable. Good. Let them. Their discomfort is evidence that your evolution is real. When you become selective with your time and your presence, the world reacts because you are no longer feeding it with your energy. Strategic isolation forces others to bring their best if they want access to you. It filters your relationships until only the strong remain. It exposes leeches who once pretended to care. It reveals who respects your mission and who fears your growth. And it gives you something priceless: mental sovereignty. In this solitude, you begin constructing the future. You plan with more accuracy. You work with more intensity. You learn at a pace that others cannot match because they are too distracted by the world's noise. You develop skills quietly, refine your thinking slowly, and expand your vision consistently. Every day spent in strategic isolation compounds your progress like interest, silent, invisible, but unstoppable. Elite focus transforms your mind into a weapon. You stop multitasking because multitasking is a myth used by the unfocused to excuse their inefficiency. You learn to lock in, eliminate, execute. You live in deep work, hours of uninterrupted mental labor where your productivity skyrockets while the world wastes time on trivialities. And something powerful happens. Your energy becomes too intense for casual environments. Your silence becomes too heavy for superficial people. Your goals become too large for small minds. You outgrow rooms long before you physically leave them. This is the essence of Machiavellian isolation. You retreat not to vanish, but to prepare your strike, to rebuild your power, to cultivate your mind, to mold your identity, to sharpen your intent, to rise without warning. The man who isolates strategically becomes unpredictable. The world loses its ability to anticipate his moves. Opportunities appear to come to him effortlessly because he has aligned his entire life toward receiving them. He becomes a ghost socially, but a giant internally. He becomes silent in public, but unstoppable in private. He becomes someone whose absence speaks louder than most people's presence. Strategic isolation does not make you weaker. It makes you inevitable. And when you walk back into the world after building yourself in silence, they will not recognize you, not because you changed a little, but because you transformed completely. If you're ready to embrace isolation as your forge and focus as your weapon, comment. Solitude sharpens my soul. Number 8. Mastering the art of calculated presence and invisible influence. Calculated presence is one of the highest forms of power a man can develop because it allows you to influence outcomes, shape perception, and command respect without raising your voice, without seeking attention, and without revealing the inner workings of your mind. If you are rebuilding yourself into a strong, quiet, calculated force, then your presence must evolve from something ordinary and predictable into something sharp, intentional, scarce, and psychologically disorienting to those who encounter it. Most people move through the world loudly. They overshare, they overreact, they over-explain, they expose their insecurities through nervous talking, and they seek validation through constant visibility. But a man on the Machiavellian path understands that true influence requires mystery, scarcity, and timing. You must learn when to appear, when to withdraw, when to speak, when to remain silent, when to reveal your plans, and when to let the world guess. Your absence must be noticeable, and your presence must be unforgettable. You begin by removing yourself from environments where your presence holds no strategic value. You stop appearing everywhere just to feel involved. You stop giving access to everyone. You stop responding instantly to situations that do not deserve your energy. You stop explaining your silence because silence is a message of its own. Slowly, intentionally, your presence becomes selective, reserved for situations where your influence can shift outcomes or strengthen your position. And this is where the psychological transformation begins. When you limit your presence, people begin to study it. They pay more attention when you speak because you do not speak often. They take your words seriously because you have filtered out noise from your vocabulary. They behave differently around you because they sense that you are watching, not with eagerness, but with calculation. You create an aura, not forced, not performed, but earned through control, restraint, and discipline. And this aura becomes a psychological weapon. People begin to interpret your silence as depth, They begin to interpret your calmness as confidence. They begin to interpret your slow reactions as strength. They begin to interpret your minimal expression as emotional mastery. Even when they cannot define what is happening, they feel it. Calculated presence works because mystery is magnetic. Humans fear the unknown, respect what they cannot read, and are drawn to those who reveal little. This is why the quiet man, when disciplined, becomes more intimidating than the loud man who constantly fights for attention. But calculated presence is only the first half. Next comes invisible influence, the art of shaping outcomes without overt force. Influence is not about telling people what to do. It is about positioning yourself so their decisions naturally align with your desired outcome. It is about understanding motives, insecurities, desires, and fears so deeply that you can predict how a situation will unfold long before others notice the shift. You influence not through pressure, but through suggestion. You influence not through dominance, but through subtlety. You influence not by proving yourself, but by observing others until their patterns reveal leverage points. People reveal themselves constantly through their words, their reactions, their inconsistencies, their emotional slips. And because you are quiet, they underestimate you. They speak freely around you, thinking your silence signals disinterest, when in reality, it signals analysis. You observe, you calculate, you take mental notes without exposing your thoughts. And when the moment comes, you act, not loudly, but precisely. A single sentence delivered at the right moment can shift a room. A single decision executed at the right time can change an entire dynamic. A single refusal to engage in someone's emotional chaos can dismantle their control over you. This is invisible influence, shaping outcomes without the world realizing you were the architect behind the shift. When you master calculated presence and invisible influence together, you transcend traditional power. You no longer fight battles. You position yourself so battles dissolve before reaching you. You no longer argue. You let silence destabilize your opponent. You no longer advertise your achievements. Others speak of them in your absence. You no longer chase recognition. Recognition begins to chase you. As you refine this mastery, your interactions evolve. You stop talking to fill silence. You let silence expose others. You stop defending yourself unnecessarily. Truth does not need defense. You stop announcing your plans because secrecy protects them. You stop over-explaining because confidence requires no justification. Your energy becomes too potent to be wasted on trivialities. Your presence becomes something people anticipate because it is no longer common. Your silence becomes something people interpret because it carries weight. Your movements become deliberate, timed, and meaningful. And whether you realize it or not, you begin influencing others simply by existing in your refined form. People adjust their tone when speaking to you. They watch their words. They avoid disrespect. They sense that you are not a man to provoke. They feel the boundaries without you needing to announce them. A disciplined, quiet, unreadable man becomes a psychological mirror. People project their insecurities onto him because he gives them nothing to grasp. And the less they know about you, the more powerful you become. Calculated presence makes the world take you seriously. Invisible influence makes the world move in your favor. Together, they create an identity that cannot be ignored, dismissed, or underestimated. You become a man who carries authority without demanding it, a man who shifts energy without forcing it, a man who speaks rarely but with impact, a man who bends situations without appearing to touch them, and ultimately, a man who does not chase power but embodies it so completely that power gravitates toward him. If you're ready to become someone whose silence is influence, whose presence is pressure, and whose mind is your greatest weapon, comment. My presence is my power. Number 9. Becoming a man of uncompromising standards and powerful boundaries. As you rebuild yourself into a strong, quiet, calculated force, you reach a stage where your standards and boundaries become the architecture of your power. Without high standards, your life becomes accessible to the wrong people, the wrong habits, and the wrong environments. Without boundaries, your energy becomes a public resource for anyone to exploit. But the man on the Machiavellian path understands that power is preserved, not performed. You begin by raising the standards you hold for yourself. Your discipline, your habits, your emotional control, your work ethic, your self-respect. A man cannot demand what he does not embody, so you sharpen yourself first. You stop tolerating your own laziness, excuses, inconsistency, and emotional messiness. You eliminate behaviors that weaken you internally long before you eliminate people who weaken you externally. And once your inner standards rise, your boundaries naturally harden. You no longer respond to disrespect disguised as jokes. You no longer entertain people who drain your mental space. You no longer keep connections based on history instead of value. You no longer let guilt pull you into obligations that sabotage your purpose. You no longer stay where you are not respected, understood, or appreciated. These boundaries are not walls, they are gates, and you control who enters, who stays, and who gets removed permanently. People will resist your boundaries because they benefited from your lack of them. They will call you selfish, cold, distant, difficult, different. Good. Let them. A man who starts protecting his power will always be misunderstood by people who only knew the version of him that overgave, over-explained, and over-committed. Your new standards will naturally offend the undisciplined and confuse the manipulative. And that is where your strength grows even deeper, because every time you enforce a boundary, you reinforce your identity. Every time you say no to someone who once controlled you, you reclaim another part of yourself. Every time you walk away from a draining situation, you reclaim your time, your clarity, and your sovereignty. This transformation reshapes your relationships. Fake friends leave, low-value people fade, opportunists vanish. Only those who respect your new structure remain, and even they adjust their behavior because your silence now carries consequences and your distance now has meaning. With strong boundaries comes emotional insulation. And emotional insulation gives you something priceless: freedom from external chaos. You stop reacting to what others say about you because you finally understand that opinions are just noise from people who don't live your life. You stop getting pulled into unnecessary drama because you know conflict wastes the energy needed for growth. You stop needing acceptance because you've built self-worth from within. A man with boundaries moves differently. He speaks less, chooses more carefully, and protects his mental state like a kingdom. And as your standards rise, so does your lifestyle, your discipline, your confidence, your circle, your opportunities. Because the universe reflects the level at which you hold yourself. When you elevate internally, everything around you must adjust or disappear. Becoming a man of uncompromising standards doesn't make you difficult. It makes you powerful. It makes you rare. It makes you someone who cannot be manipulated, drained, or controlled. If you're ready to build boundaries that protect your power and standards that reshape your destiny, comment, "My standards shape my strength." Number 10. Transforming into a man who moves with purpose, power, and destiny. Rebuilding yourself into a strong, quiet, calculated force reaches its final stage when you begin moving through the world with unwavering purpose. When every step you take, every silence you hold, every decision you make aligns with the man you are becoming, not the man you once were. This is where transformation stops being an internal battle and becomes an external reality. You no longer drift through life hoping things will improve. You engineer improvement. You no longer wait for opportunities. You position yourself where opportunity has no choice but to find you. You no longer see obstacles as threats. You see them as filters that separate the weak from the destined. Purpose turns your life into a straight line. No detours, no unnecessary stops, no circles of repetition. You learn to eliminate anything that does not push you forward, whether it is a habit, a distraction, a person, or an emotion. Your energy becomes sacred. Your time becomes structured. Your mission becomes your compass. And this purpose radiates through your presence. People feel a shift in you even before they understand it. They notice your calmness under pressure, your selective attention, your refusal to engage in meaningless conversations, your increasing distance from chaos. They start to realize you've stepped onto a different path, a higher frequency, one reserved for individuals who build themselves deliberately. Power begins to show in the way you turn down things that once tempted you. Growth shows in the way you stay silent where you once reacted. Strength shows in how quickly you walk away from anything that disrupts your focus. And destiny shows in how naturally opportunities, people, and environments begin rearranging themselves around your new identity. You are no longer chasing anything. You are aligning with everything meant for you. The man who moves with purpose intimidates those who live without it. The man who walks quietly toward his mission exposes those who wander aimlessly. And the man who carries inner certainty becomes immune to external noise. This is your new life, a life where your silence carries authority, your discipline shapes outcomes, your focus creates momentum, and your presence bends environments. You don't announce your goals, you execute them. You don't brag about progress, you display it through results. You don't force connections, you attract what resonates with your path. You don't fear being underestimated, you use it. And you don't fear being alone, because you finally understand solitude is the birthplace of every version of you worth becoming. You are now stepping into a future designed by intention, built by discipline, sharpened by solitude, and protected by boundaries. If you're ready to enter this new chapter and become the man who moves with unstoppable purpose and silent power, comment, "I walk with destiny."